Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram Auctions, and you might have seen me in previous videos going through the fascinating German album catalogue and reviewing the Blue Stereo Collection box set, otherwise known as BC13. In this video, I'll be putting this German BC13 box set up against the mighty UK edition, and we'll go into depth, and I mean depth, about the sound quality of each album in it, and find out which one deserves a place in your collection. It's true to say that most German Beatles albums from the 1960s sounded pretty flat and uninspiring. Things, however, got much more interesting once we move into the 1970s and 80s. At the time of this collection's release, EMI was still using cuttings made by the Beatles' original cutting engineer, Harry Moss, whose work remained remarkably consistent throughout his time at Abbey Road. Electrola, EMI's sister company in Germany, however, realised that their original 1960s cuttings weren't going to cut it in the demanding hi-fi market of the 1970s. So work began remastering them at their studios in Cologne. By the time the BC13 box set was released in 1978, they had completely recut all of their albums and produced what they thought were a set of discs worthy of comparison to the UK originals. The UK BC13 set comprised of regular pressings, with nothing specifically to identify them as being from the box set. The Germans, on the other hand, put in a bit more of an effort with their set. Unlike the cheap-looking semi-gloss card of the UK set, the albums in the German set have a more attractive matte finish, and all covers have the unique 198 catalogue number series on the rear panel, which matched the box's 198 series number. Albums that had originally been on the Herd Zoo label in the 1960s were now on Apple, and they were Please Please Me, Help, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Odeon imprint remained on With the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, Beatles For Sale, and Rubber Soul, which all stuck with their 1969 blue label designs. Another nice touch about the German set is that they all had poly-lined inner sleeves, which added to its air of quality over the cheaper-looking unlined ones in the UK set. The German box is of similar construction to the UK one, although it has a slightly different texture and a darker blue colour. It also had its catalogue number in the front upper left corner, as well as on the spine. You've only got to hear the recordings the Beatles made for Polydor in Hamburg to know how good German recording equipment and techniques were back in the 1960s. Bert Kaempfert, the producer of those sessions, got dynamics from the Beatles' voices and instruments which George Martin, despite using custom-made EMI equipment, was never able to capture at Abbey Road. Also, stereo wasn't taken seriously, for pop especially, by EMI until the late 1960s, and mono limped on in their catalogue until 1969. Germany was way ahead hi-fi-wise in the early 1960s and had pretty much abandoned mono altogether for albums by 1964. In fact, Something New became the last Beatles album to be issued in that format in Germany in September of that year. So how does all that German engineering and technical know-how match up against the intuitive, creative-led Brits? Well, let's line them up and put their sound quality to the test. But hang on a minute, is this really fair? After all, we know how good the UK set is. Okay, let's make this challenge a bit more interesting. Let's go 2 against 1. I mean, in addition to this 1978 set, I'm going to add this 1985 set to the mix. Now, like the 1978 set, this is an analogue set, the final one in fact, before everything went digital in 1987. All of the discs in this box were cut using the then new DMM cutting technique, which you can see just by looking at the surface profiles and how smooth the grooves are compared to the 1978 disc. DMM, or Direct Metal Mastering, was developed in the late 1970s and early 1980s by German company Teldec, Basically, it involved cutting directly onto a copper-plated master disc, instead of the traditional soft lacquer-coated aluminium disc using a Neumann VMS82 lathe. When Electrola got hold of their first DMM lathe, they made test cuttings of the Beatles' Red and Blue double albums, which were enough to convince EMI management to give them the go-ahead to switch over totally to DMM technology. Using the DMM system, it was possible to cut longer sides with increased upper frequency range, all with lower surface noise. It also reduced the risk of jumping or sticking, as well as eliminating end-of-side distortion and post and pre-echo. In 1983, Electrola began cutting most of their rock and pop releases using DMM, which of course included the Beatles back catalogue. In the early 1980s, mastering engineers were doing their best to create the most modern sound possible from old recordings. It's quite the opposite of today, as most engineers do their best to keep the sound as close as possible to the originals. What I'm going to do now is to go through each album in all of these sets and compare the pressings from each one. First will be this UK set, which is incidentally from 1985 and contains the final analogue cuttings of these albums. Then the same from this 1978 German first pressing set, and then finally from this analogue DMM set, which like the UK box is also from 1985. So let battle commence. The stereo mix of Please Please Me has always been a frustrating listen, and for many, including myself, mono has always been my go-to version. The solid state -4 pressing in this set stays true to the sound and spirit of the 1963 original, but being a solid state cut, it's a bit dry and lifeless. The 1973 German equivalent uses the A2 cut from the legendary 1973 repressing of the album, which originally appeared in this cover. On this pressing, the Cologne engineers managed to bring out what the white coats at Abbey Road couldn't. It's a remarkable sounding record with such depth and clarity, and is, for my money, the best sounding stereo pressing of this album, period. The 1985 DMM, however, is a different story. Here, they really went to town to try and modernize the sound. Firstly, by narrowing the stereo image, and then whacking the bass up so much and so badly that it sounds like it's coming from the room upstairs. Add compression and limiting to that, and you've got an unpleasant, aggressive sounding record, which I certainly don't recommend. And this waveform of I Saw Her Standing There bears me out on this. The UK and the 1978 German disc look very good, with healthy dynamics and clear differences between both the vocal and instrumental channels. The top one being the vocals and the lower one being the instruments, by the way. As I switch to the 1985 disc, see how the instrument channel below becomes much louder than the vocal channel above, making everything sound very nasty indeed. Anyway, thanks to the great sounding 1978 cut, it's 1-0 to Germany at this very early stage in the game, but there's still a lot to play for. The original 1963 stereo mix of With the Beatles was a poor sounding effort. They had, in John Lennon's own words, double-tracked themselves off that album, which made for a fantastically exciting mono record, but killed the stereo version stone dead. But by 1984 and this -6 cutting, Harry Moss had got the measure of its sound and created a much punchier, cleaner mix which surpassed all of the other UK cuttings to date. The 1978 German pressing uses a 1969 recut from what sounds like an inferior copy tape, and although it puts up a decent fight, it can't match Harry's cut. The 1985 disc really does come out fighting, and you can hear the compressors and limiters working their socks off. But like Please Please Me, the instruments are really pumped up and dominate everything. It's a mix which wouldn't have seemed out of place in 1963, but a long way away from the authentic vintage sound we've come to expect today. So let's call this one for the UK and Harry, which makes it 1-1 as we move into A Hard Day's Night. This is their best sounding stereo album so far, and with its clean and detailed sound, it's hard to fault the UK disc. German first pressings sounded very poor, and this 1969 recut does little to improve matters. It's overall very woolly sounding and in desperate need of some high-end boost. Enter the 1985 mix, which adds quite a lot of everything, but all in the wrong places, making it sound very harsh and frankly unlistenable. To be fair, the tape they were given to work with must have been completely worn out, so it's a mystery why they didn't just order up a new one from London. So far as this album is concerned, it's a walkover for the UK disc. Right, on to Beatles For Sale. It's tough to find a bad-sounding pre-digital UK pressing of this album. Harry Moss's 1985-3 cut doesn't have the magic of the original -1, but in all respects stays true to it. Like the original, it has a depth and a warmth which you can turn up loud and enjoy without hurting your ears. The 1978 German disc, whilst cut a little quieter, is surprisingly close. It's a 1969 cut, which too is very crankable. The 1985 disc is probably the worst sounding pressing of this album I've ever heard. It's clearly a further attempt to modernise the sound, but it backfires, turning it into a complete horror show. My head really hurt after listening to it, so do yourself a favour and leave it. As the UK and 1978 German discs were so close, I'm going to call this one a draw, as we move on to Help. It's a serviceable effort with nothing special to note about it, and delivers just what you'd expect to hear when compared to a first pressing. The 1978 German disc is very much in the same vein, albeit a little softer, but not in a bad way. The 1985 disc, with its boosted bass and muddy mids, is something I really don't want to listen to again, so I'm going to call this one for the UK set. Rubber Soul bizarrely saw the return to the hard vocal instrumental separation of the Please Please Me album, and was never a popular mix, especially in its early guise. This UK-6 does a decent job and is a very pleasant listen, in what would be its final appearance before George Martin's misguided remix in 1987. The 1978 German disc is a -1 #-2 cutting and has a bass boost which actually improves the sound overall. The highs and the mids sound very sweet, and I'd be happy to listen to this over the UK disc. The 1985 again overplays the instruments and also has that unwelcome bass boost from the room upstairs. So like the others I've heard so far in this set, I won't be listening to this again either. The Abbey Road engineers still hadn't entirely mastered stereo by the time this record was released in 1966, and Revolver's first stereo mix was a rather lazy affair. Also, Jeff Emmerich's generous use of compression on the original recording must have made it a nightmare to cut. The -5 in this UK set is an improvement over the 1966 pressing. It's a punchier, more confident-sounding mix, which is very easy on the ear. The German disc with its A2-B2 cut is a little quieter, but does a decent job, although it doesn't do enough for me to elevate it above the UK disc. The 1985 disc is in trouble right from the start. The count into Taxman sounds like it's being played down the telephone, and when the track kicks in, so does the big bass boost. Massive compression on compression is never going to turn out well, so it's the UK disc which gets the nod in this round. By far the best sounding stereo pressing of this album I've ever heard is the UK Nimbus pressing from 1984, which you can find out more about in one of our previous videos. But how does this lot measure up? The UK pressing in this set is a -6, and whilst it doesn't have the aura of the Nimbus, is a decent sounding all-analogue record. The 1978 German A1B2 cut is a very nice sounding disc. It has a touch more bass than the UK, but in a good way, and is one you can really turn up and enjoy even more. The 1985 doesn't have the refinement of the 1978 pressing, and has a significant upper and low end boost. Although it's the best sounding disc from this set so far, it's the German disc from the 78 box which wins my vote here. Now it's time for the White Album. The discs in this UK set are clean and warm, with great vocals and very close to the 1968 original, which we've come to know and love over the years. The 1978 German discs share the same clarity, but like the German first pressing, is lacking in the bass department. Bass is something which the 1985 certainly doesn't lack, and like the original mono, it's less toppy, which I think suits it. So it might be controversial in the wake of what's gone on so far, but I'm going to make this one my winner in this round. Incidentally, this set is an analogue DMM cut, which has A2, B3, A2, B2 matrices with no gap between Savoy Truffle and Cry Baby Cry, which makes it quite a sought-after pressing. Hang on, I hear a couple of you cry. What about the DMM pressing? Well, okay, let's take a look at that. This DMM cutting comes from 1987 and was cut from a digital source. To me, it has a harsh top end and not enough bass. I know some people like it, but I don't, so there. Many people would gladly replace Yellow Submarine in this set for a German magical mystery tour, but it's here, so let's see which one came out on top. This was never a great sounding album, even as a UK first pressing, and the -7-3 UK disc here is nothing special either. The German 78 pressing sounds better balanced to me and would be my first choice. The 1985 disc is very odd. One thing which struck me as totally bizarre was the opening note of It's All Too Much, which is virtually eliminated by the limiter. And look at the size of that runout on side 2. It's so wide, it looks like some rip-off 12-inch from the 1980s. Something I'm much more fond of is Harry Moss's -6-4 cut of Abbey Road in the UK box. It's not as good as the 1969-2-1, but I'd be happy listening to it any day. The German 1978 sounds okay, but everything is a full step down from the UK disc, and it sounds too tame overall. The 1985 disc has a massive bass boost, which although didn't suit the early albums, where it was never a feature anyway, does sound good on this album, where it was well recorded in the first place, and I enjoyed it. So the purist in me wants to give this round to the UK disc, but I'd secretly go for the German 85. Who knows what, if any, vinyl we'll get when the Let It Be film finally comes out, but it's got big shoes to fill. Harry's -4-5 UK pressing is perfectly balanced in all departments and would be hard to top. The German 78 press isn't nearly as good and sounds flat and uninspiring. And whilst the 1985 disc is an improvement in the bass department especially, it doesn't top the sound of the UK disc. And so finally to Rarities. Despite my affection for this album, it's not a great sounding record. The UK and 1978 German discs sound pretty flat with little to get excited about, but the 1985 German disc has a surprise up its sleeve. Rain is marked as and is supposed to be in mono, but is presented here in sparkling true stereo. It's really a great sounding mix, which really highlights one of McCartney's shining hours on bass. The low-end DMM boost really brings it alive in a way which I haven't heard before. It could be worth getting the set just for this track. So let's have a look at the old scoreboard, and we see that the UK box has 7 points and the combined German team have 7 points too. So would you believe it? It's a draw. Seriously though, the BC13 Blue Box is the best sounding stereo box set out there, and it really deserves a place in your collection. Even if you've already got the 2012 set, I recommend you find one or even both of these. I've had a lot of fun listening to these sets and telling you about them, but what about you? Let me know your favourite pressings in the comments and maybe give me some suggestions for future videos too. There's a lot more coming up very soon, including videos about albums from the US, Australia and Czechoslovakia, and even some more cassettes. So make sure you hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on those. In the meantime, you can also find us on our website, parlogramauctions.com, or on eBay, Facebook and Instagram. Last but not least, you can also join the channel for early access to all our videos and enjoy exclusive content. But it's time to stick a fork in this one because it's done. So I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.